Who the fuck is Mike Mignola? Michael Mignola. Mignola? I've heard it pronounced Mignola. I've heard it pronounced Mignola. I believe Mignola is the proper pronunciation. I don't know. The name appears somewhat, I don't know, Hispanic or Latin or something like that. So I assume it's Mignola as opposed to Mignola. That doesn't matter. I don't care about his stupid name, his stupid, questionably pronounced name. I care about his drawings. That's what we do here in the Ewan network. Drawings and drawing-based things. This is Batman. So as I understand it, I don't know for sure, but from my limited research, which is none research, I believe Mike Mignola started drawing comics at some point and he wasn't very good, and so someone said maybe stick to inking instead of actually like drawing the comics, and he was like, oh, okay. So he inked a bunch of comics, but then at some point, somewhere along the way, someone said, do you want to actually draw some comics? And then he went, yeah, all right. He's known for a bunch of stuff. Hellboy, I guess. He's known for Hellboy. He's done a bunch. I guess rather than being known for a bunch of stuff, he has done a bunch of stuff, but he's known for, Hellboy, that guy. Red Man. He designed Red Man. Method Man was someone else. And Jizza and Rizza were other art. Well, that wasn't going anywhere, was it? And this is one of the... I don't have much of his stuff because, I don't give a shit. But I picked this up because, years and years ago, because it was interesting to me. Because I don't care for Batman comics too much, but then I thought Mignola, it's dark and it's eerie and, it's Cthulhu sort of stuff and it's, what's going on? And I read it and I did think this comic in particular falls into a category which I feel not necessarily a lot, but a bunch of superhero, for instance, comics do, where you read the story and you realise it doesn't feel specific to the superhero that it's supposedly written for, where this doesn't feel necessarily like a Batman comic. It feels like you could remove Batman from it and put any other sort of person in there and it would work just as well, because it's not got any of his main arch nemeses. He goes to there's this guy in a graveyard and he falls in a crypt, and then there's some weird shit happens, and he fell in a coffin, and then is he awake? Is he not awake? Is he alive? Is he not alive? I don't know. And then there's a dead guy, and then there's a skeleton in the coffin, and there's a bunch of historical shit. Oh, the skeleton's got him, it's biting him. Oh no. And then it's red, and he jumps out, and he's like, Batman's turning into a corpse, and then there's a guy, and then, Cthulhu. Really, I consider, especially in this, and it was early 90s, and then I think this came right before Hellboy, so it sort of makes sense that this imagery and this comic, it feels like you could, like I say, remove Batman and replace him with someone else, because it would fit into the occult, Lovecraftian horrors, somewhat detective work. It would fit perfectly with something like Hellboy. And then I believe maybe even only a year after this comic came out, the first Hellboy was published by Dark Horse Comics, and this contains Seed of Destruction, which is the famous first story of Hellboy, the first proper appearance of Hellboy, I think, where he had the whole he came out of hell, he looks like a little boy, Hellboy, little monkey, red monkey boy. There he is in the photo there. Now, and you can see the Lovecraftian horrors. I really feel like especially early on, I think I was going to say before, Mignola really seems to wear his influences on his sleeve in terms of Cthulhu, Lovecraft, devils, and occult horrors and the weird monsters and cemeteries and things. And he did obviously carry that forward throughout Hellboy and the BPRD, the Bureau for BPRD, Bureau for Paranormal Research and Defense. Frogs, you know, all that kind of stuff. But so I recall when I was younger, a younger me, I was aware of Hellboy. I'd seen the Ron Perlman film, the first one, which is really good. It was alright. It was a good film. And then I was aware of Hellboy as a character, and I like how he looked. Big, hulking, red guy with big kind of horns and a gun and shit. And I was like, oh, that's a cool character. And then I was sort of into comic books, kind of. And I thought, hey, cool, Hellboy comics, let me have a look. And then I picked them up and looked through them, and I was like, what the fuck is this? What is this shit? It's like big blocky shapes and no detail and just like large portions of black. It almost looks like it could be cut out of paper and pasted onto like South Park, but not as consistently hilarious, obviously, as South Park. I thought the comics looked really boring, honestly. I was really unimpressed. A young me, like I don't know, 12-year-old, 13, 14-year-old Ewan was unimpressed. Excuse me while I dig snot out of my nose. It's a congestion day today. Yeah, I was terrifically unimpressed with the Hellboy comics, because the comics I sort of grew up with and was impressed by were comics like Spider-Man and I don't know, early to mid Image comics. Lots of action and detail and dynamic shit and cross-hatching everywhere. All kinds of just crazy shit. So then when I looked at Hellboy, it was such a vast difference, like blocks of colour, portions where effectively almost nothing's going on. Lots of panels like this, like contemplative landscape panels and thoughtful things. There's no like, I mean, there is action in it, but it's not action every page. So yeah, I poo-pooed it. I turned my nose up at Hellboy, and I thought it was a bunch of shitty nonsense. Then over the years I wisened up a little bit and realised actually Mike Mignola is one of, and I'll say this with no exaggeration and no hyperbole, one of the best makers of comic books there is. There are people that can draw better than him or can draw more dynamically, more detailed imagery. I'm not going to say definitively, but there are probably people that can draw better Hellboy, who could draw Hellboy better than Mike Mignola, which is an odd thing to say since he's the one who created the guy. But I think you understand what I'm saying. But in terms of actually making a comic book and telling a story through sequential images and building and composing these images into a story, there are people on his level, but very few people I feel can reach his level, because he does a lot with a little. He needs to provide. No, he doesn't need. He provides a lot of information with very little information, if that makes sense. There's examples back here I wanted to use. I think they're back here. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. There were some examples. There were some examples with water that I wanted to. Yeah, here, perfect, cool. So yeah, lots of silhouettes, lots of blackness, large chunks of shadow, using shapes to tell a story rather than detail, because I used to think everything has to be fully detailed and fully cross-hatched, and you've got to show every little bit of pouch and thing and gills and the fish man and everything. And then, for instance, this little bit of storytelling here, this is water under a bridge, stairs going down to it. The water itself is just one block shape. It's got a slight gradient in the colour, but it's just a block shape. No ripples, no like shimmering effects, no splashy things. There's bubbles towards the end, but effectively nothing. It's just block colour with these beings, these fish people, dragging this woman's corpse under the water, and then just blocks of colour to show the water as they're going down into the water, under the water, and then a few little bubbles there. That's perfectly told with such little information, virtually no detail in these creatures past a little bit of hatching for texture and just some knobbles here to show that they have like textured green skin as they go under the water. And it's perfect because it's a moonlit night, clear, like stagnant green, cold, mucky water, and it's still, it's a quiet night, it's still, there's not a lot going on, and it tells that perfectly. Just that tiny little bit of storytelling is just done perfectly in shadow, largely with minimal information showing the bodies, but it shows the shapes of what's happening, as it would be on a dark night where you wouldn't necessarily be able to see the details of these bodies and such. You'd just be able to see the shapes of them. And ink is a thing as well. So in a lot of Image comics, especially I feel the mid to late Image comics, and often a lot in Marvel, somewhat a lot in DC, largely, especially newer comics in the new digital age, the artists themselves will often, not always, but often, just basically do the outlines. They won't even do shadows. They'll just do outlines and then maybe some like minimal hatching. And then send that to the colorist or the inker and then the colorist. And the colorist will put in all the work. But because of that, because there's very little blacks in the... we're talking colours of ink here, it's not a race thing. There's very little black work in the initial pencil and ink stages. And so the art, when it's finished, with all the computer colouring and shading effects, can feel very sort of like very light and wishy-washy, because there's nothing holding it down. Where I feel personally, the more ink that's on a page, literally the heavier and more solid the artwork can feel. So where you've got just outlines of stuff, it feels like it's like an airy, empty outline. But then you've got bits like this where half the body's just in shadow. It's just solid black, and it feels like a more solid form, like a solid shape of this creature jumping at Hellboy in the water. And that's, so you go from this still water here to then water here being disturbed. But even then, if you look at the marks he's using, it's basically just like a few ellipses. Is that an ellipse, an oval? Just a bunch of ink marks to sort of give the impression of water, and then the basic shape of the splash. It's not drawing every splash in detail. Like, for instance, Ryan Ottley, who's a very, very, very good, a great comic book artist, especially of the modern age. Invincible, fucking Spider-Man, Hulk, whole bunch of shit. He draws amazing, like, splashy goop effects, like blood and goop. And he draws almost painstakingly every little blob and splish and tendril of goop in a place, which is perfectly fine for what he does. But in terms of the bare bones of what you need to tell a story, Mike Mignola's got it like spot on. He just uses minimum information, but it's perfectly done. So with his inking, it's very, very, very solid, and this is something I am at least trying to do in my my later, more recent comic book work, of trying to use more solid blacks, especially because where I paint, when you are painting, you feel like you have to paint every little bit, but if you do that, you lose this weight to the weight of the black solid ink that gives a lot of substance to the comics. Yeah. And colour is another thing as well. So this was the early days, and then this was the later days, Hellboy in Hell. This was in fact the final. I believe these are the later ones. This is the last Hellboy comic, the last official proper timeline Hellboy comic that ever there was. And it's so he uses colour very well. His work works in black and white. It's really interesting to see in black and white, but he's so smart with his colour. So for instance, in this storyline, he's gone into hell, and hell is dying, and so it's decaying and it's quiet, and it's there's not a lot going on. So it's lots of greys and browns as he's going through hell, meeting all these weird characters and shit. But by contrast, when he shows parts that aren't quiet, away from these greys and browns, because it's a very quiet, monotone tone to it. But then he shows fire and brimstone and rivers of blood with these shock red panels. They really, really jump out, and they're really effective. These hot colours that jump out of the cold colours. Now and then, and little, hot spots of the fiery crown on a throne in hell, because Hellboy's supposed to take up the throne of hell, which is why hell's dying, because it doesn't have his king there, and Satan's like dead or dying or something. I don't know, I haven't actually read the thing. Come on now. Yeah, such effective use of colour. Same in the olden days, in the old comics, the green and blues of the quiet, mucky waters, but then the red of Hellboy getting stuck down there. There's this is the art of Hellboy. There's some cool stuff in there. There you go, cool paintings, watercolors, washes and stuff, which are again an example of him using his knowledge and use of color, putting it into practice of really, really effective, good use of all that shit. There was another one. I don't know, there's a bunch of them. Hey, that's that's the original drawing of Hellboy he did, which is a really good story actually for how he developed Hellboy in the first place. Is this drawing was apparently just a bunch of shapes and sort of stuff that he liked to draw, monsters and demons, horns and these stuff all on his belt, and cool shapes and weird things, crabs and fish. And apparently this shape on his belt was just a shape on his belt he drew, and it was empty, and he thought, well, it needs something, and he just wrote Hellboy just to be fun or funny. And then that obviously turned into what we know and love as Hellboy, so that's something. There was, I don't know, there were and was and is and ofs paintings I wanted to look at, but I can't find them, so fuck it. But he's perfect. He uses detail where it's necessary, and he doesn't where it's not. And he's so good at separating images. So in like fight scenes and stuff, you never lose who's where. So this is like a werewolf. And this Hellboy, and whenever two people are colliding, you never start to question like what the fuck's going on. Like if you watch Transformers, maybe it's the point, but like you don't know what the fuck's happening because everything's doing this and everything looks the same. It's all muddy colours and just metal and shit going everywhere. But then, for instance, I'm sure if Mike Mignola was to draw a Transformers comic, it would probably be good. Probably. This is a good one as well. So his colour's really, really good, but this shows black and white Hellboy in Hell in black and white, and this is good as well because it shows the actual ink work. It's not pure black and white. It's the scanned drawings, not really adjusted with contrast and stuff, so you can actually see where he's applying ink rather than it just being flat black, which is very, very interesting to see. And so when there's a blast of light, because you get so used to him using these solid blacks as shadow to like weigh the image down. But then, for instance, when there's a blast of light coming off of this guy, it's so effective to just remove all of that shadowing, bar where it's needed to define certain characters. it's really, really effective comic book making and storytelling. And then almost the bravery, especially in his later years, Hellboy's 20 plus years old, to have panels like this. There might in the comic be like a text box, but effectively just black panels where basically nothing's going on. Tick, tick, tick. These quiet, contemplative, just slow moving panels of quiet villages and landscapes and things. Again, my idea of comics is just pack as much action as you can into every panel. But then there are moments where you can just stop and breathe and have little moments of quiet where he's just chilling in a house and let time pass. You don't need fucking go every second, every minute, every panel. And what is interesting to see as well is the development, because if you look at the Hellboy here, if I can find one, well, I guess Hellboy in Hell. I've got to find out at least one example. Jesus. It's interesting to see the development of Hellboy himself and the development of Mike Mignola as an artist. That he has grown and developed as an artist. He hasn't thought, well, this is how I draw Hellboy and this is how I draw comics, so I have to stick to it. He's gotten a lot more comfortable over the years, and as I say, with him using what's necessary, he's cut out a lot of what obviously isn't necessary. So his newer comics are far less, I don't want to say far less detailed, but they're a lot more focused on shapes and storytelling as opposed to being packed with detail. I think this has some of his older ones in. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe I made that up. Oh yeah, it does have some of his older stuff. Yeah. So, I mean, maybe this isn't a fair comparison, but for instance, right here as well. Literally the same. So you can see this is all flat blacks, but then this is the actual ink work. Almost packed with detail. Hellboy has all these sort of lines of defining his muscles and stuff. The pouches on his belt. A lot of shadow still. It does have that Mignola weight of the ink and the shadow, but then there is a lot of detail. There's nuts and bolts and vents and bubbles and creases and fur and all kinds of shit going on in this ink work. But then you see his more modern stuff, and there are details, but if you look, they're very sort of like almost vague details, just sort of implying texture and such. Even in the buildings, he's not showing every brick. He's just showing sort of the shapes that make up this landscape, these buildings. So that's very interesting to see. I even provided. So I drew this Hellboy from a Hellboy. It's from one of the first Hellboys, wherever it is. Because I thought it'd be interesting to see. So that's one of the original Hellboys from Seed of Destruction, and then this is from Hellboy in Hell, one of the much later Hellboys. And so I drew them to try to get the heads sort of about the same size, so you can kind of see the development of Hellboy as a character. And he looks like he's aged. I don't know if that was intentional or if it's just because I know from personal experience, I don't have a lot of experience in comic book making or whatever, but I have some. And even in that sort of limited experience, I know if you're doing a full comic book, say 60 to 80 pages, the characters, not always, but it's likely that the characters from the start of the comic book will look different to the end of the comic book, because the more you draw them, you loosen up and you get used to drawing the shapes and used to figuring out which shapes best define the individual characters. So you sort of, you maybe try not to necessarily, but you do kind of start simplifying the characters the more and more you draw them. And they then sort of have more character to them. And so I don't know with Hellboy if that was necessarily intentional on Mike Mignola's part, if he thought, well, I'm going to make Hellboy more like this as it goes on, or if it's completely just down to him drawing and developing as an artist and a comic book maker. But you can see the poses are, he does have his arm up, so he is a bit more hunched here. But even so, this shoulder is very, very strong shoulders, fur and muscles, and stuff on his belt. And there's not a lot, but a few cracks and stuff in his hand here. But then the more modern one, much more sort of slumped, and he does look like he's aged, which is kind of cool. Not so much detail in his face, very basic shapes and basic lines and marks to sort of more or less imply rather than define shapes and things. And the texture in his gauntlet, just a few little like knobs and bumps to show that there is texture rather than drawing each and every crack and crevice. And so it is interesting to sort of see them overlaid, to see how sort of the character has developed, which isn't necessarily a sign or something to point towards Mike Mignola specifically, that like, oh, Mike Mignola does this, no other artist does. It happens to a bunch of artists, but it's just an interesting thing to see. And there have been times, of course, with certain artists I could name but won't, where their artwork over the years has developed, but not necessarily for the better. And I feel like Mike Mignola's hasn't necessarily gotten better, but it's still, I'd say, just as good as it used to be, but in a different way. I have other bunch of shit I could show as well. This came out after the quarantine. It was a quarantine sketchbook. He did a bunch of pencil drawings of just individual characters and monsters and creatures and things, which are really, really cool. And I believe they were all like auctioned off for charity, which I guess is good if you like helping people. All that shit. He-Man, flower head, weird fucking people. He's got a fucking turnip for a head. What's going on? Or is it a beetroot? I don't know. I'm not a fucking gardener. So they were cool drawings, and it's good to see just drawings sometimes. His comic books are obviously fantastic, and his world building and scene setting and image composing is really, really cool. But it is good to see his drawings, which is why I like books like this that are falling apart because I don't take care of my possessions, where you get to see his sketches. And I am waiting to see, because there's a lot of books, and the Hellboy graphic novels will have portions of like sketchbook pages at the back of them and stuff, which is really, 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 really cool. But I'm waiting to see, similar to the quarantine sketchbooks. So he's got like I guess a method of publishing these books. The first 20 years of Hellboy is a really good book. Does this have a painting that I wanted to look at? Yeah. So yeah, again, his use of colour. Washes, greys and browns, desert kind of colours. And then the red, not a shocking, like cadmium bright red, a toned down red of Hellboy. It stands out, but it fits it. It's really, really good. And that's cool use of light and shadow, greys and blues, with the warmth of the yellow surrounding him. All these funny little imps around. Really, really good. So his books get published like this, cool hardback, good quality reprints of his work. Some of them previously unpublished work, which is really, really cool to see. Octopuses and shit, we like those. Those are fun. With a nice spine. So I'm waiting now for, I don't know if it will happen, it might not, but a book like this of just his sketchbooks would be really, really cool to see. Just designs of characters and monsters and things. It's cool to see them in the backs of these books. And often, if I'm picking up a Mignola graphic novel, a Hellboy book or whatever, I will flip to the back to be like, oh, does he have sketches in there? And like, here, yeah, he does. Designing Martians and weird alien contraptions and big fat demons and stuff. I'd love to see just a book like this of just his sketchbook work would be fantastic. Because with any artist that you sort of love and admire, it's cool to see as much of their work as possible, but it's always cool then to see what happens before that, like as an artist. Because the artist creates artwork, but it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't come out of nowhere. There's a lot of build up to that. So where does that come from? And so that's good to see. I don't have much else to say. I'm not really breaking new ground. I'm not bringing light to a previously unheard of artist. It's not exactly a hot take to say Mike Mignola's bloody good at what he does, is it? But, you know, he is bloody good at what he does.